He was born March 21st, and we named him Nainli, which means renewal within the cycle of life. When I was going to be a first-time mom, a lot of people gave me traditional advice about, how to prepare and making sure that I had access to healthy, traditional food. I'd always remember my mom saying things like caribou is worth its weight in gold, and whenever we get fresh meat, that was always shared right away. But caribou's always been the main staple. Our whole lifestyles are centered around the caribou, and we built our communities in the migration of the caribou. And that's why we respect the caribou, because of that connection. The 1002 lands are the coastal lands where caribou calve. The Gwich'in name for that area is the sacred place where life begins. As a mother, the most critical time in your young one's life is after birth. When Nainli was born, right away I looked for him, knowing that he was moving and crying, and that's all I needed to see, really, to feel that connection. That becomes really important in that moment. And you could just imagine disturbances in that context are tenfold. I remember when we were watching it and the feeling, I'm sure we all felt it at the same time when we heard the news.
I said that the bill would be on my desk before Christmas, so we did a rush job today. It's not fancy, but it's the Oval Office. We're opening up Anwar for drilling. They've tried to get that for 40 years. They've tried to get that even during the Reagan administration. They could never get it.
It's really emotional, and not knowing what was going to happen and what it meant. And I don't know why I'm getting emotional about it now, but I guess it's just when you think of the young people and all the fights we're already up against, it's just like you have to deal with this now. And so I know a lot of our people really felt the impact of oil and gas drilling operations. It means a lot of traffic, it means a lot of noise, a lot of disturbances, and the traffic alone, I can't imagine having traffic coexist with calving caribou. I've never heard of it. Every 2 years, the Gwich'in put on a gathering. We call it the Gwich'in Gathering. Basically, our nations come together and discuss issues and concerns and strategies regarding the herd's population and habitat.
Today is an auspicious day as the 15th biannual Gwich'in Gathering. From 30 years ago, the elders called for us to gather.
The reason we're here today is to stand together for the survival of the caribou, the porcupine caribou herd, and how important that caribou herd is to us as a nation, because we all depend on that caribou. And without that caribou, I think we'd be in really grave circumstances. And it's very important that we stand together and united.
Being at the gathering shows that caribou have always brought together community, but I feel like it's so unfortunate that we have to come together under these circumstances.
And I remember feeling the fear in the pit of my stomach when I heard that there was proposed oil and gas development going to take place right in the core calving grounds of the porcupine caribou. And I tell the decision makers in Washington, D.C., that any decisions that you make today is going to impact 7 generations from now.
The caribou are a renewable energy source. They have gone for over 2 million years, and they'll go for another 2 million if you leave them alone. To go into the last 5% of the Arctic coast that had not been slated for oil and gas development beforehand, and to take out any amount of oil from there, they will not return, and you will put their futures and their birth rates into peril.
Now, more than ever, it's putting us in a position where we have to think about what are we going to do now with our future. I can say as a mother that sometimes we can't always explain these things, we just know them. And I think that's also instinctual within the caribou, is just you want to have that healthy environment to ensure the protection and safety of our children first.
This is my island, Anegada. I think it is one of the most beautiful islands in the Caribbean. I am Angelina. We live with another island dweller who is unique to us. They had a home here a long time before people came, but now there aren't many of them left. The Anegada rock iguana is the most endangered lizard in the world. That's Mikey and Kelly. Mikey works for the National Parks Trust as a warden. He looks after the iguanas. And that's Kelly from Fort Worth Zoo. She comes to the island 3 or 4 times a year. We call her the iguana girl.
You know, I started working with this species about 16 years ago. And I had no idea we'd still be here fighting the fight.
You 16 years, I'm 13 years.
Exactly. We got to figure out, you know, what the problem is.
That's the major issue right now. I just really love Anegada rock iguanas, Kelly.
I do too, Mikey. You know, when I was a little kid, I absolutely adored dinosaurs, so fascinated. I'd see a really big lizard like this, I'd be like, oh my God, those are the dinosaurs. So when I got the opportunity to come here and work with this species, I totally jumped on it.
I don't blame you because they're unique, they're endangered, and they're only found here.
Right. There's only about 200 left when we started this program about 16 years ago. I just can't believe how big they are. It's so awesome.
Some people was wondering, like, asking me, like, why are iguanas so important to the island? Especially when they want to build businesses and stuff like that, or homes on the land.
So the great thing about reptiles is they swallow their food whole. And as they're walking around, they go to the bathroom and they're defecating seeds and they're spreading their seeds all over the place. That's why we kind of call them the farmers of the forest. And when you have iguanas spreading seeds, you have a healthy forest. And certain plants are almost dependent on passing through an iguana gut to have really good germination rates.
The goats and cattle were brought to Anegada in the 1800s. So it's not native to here. They're making a problem because eating up all the iguana's vegetation. It grows back years and years and years later.
Mikey and Kelly monitor the iguana's habitat to make sure it is safe.
Rock iguanas lay anywhere from 9 to 15 eggs, but only once a year. But she's also threatened by the potential invasion of another iguana that doesn't even belong in the British Virgin Islands. Green iguanas can lay up to 80 eggs, but then they can also do it almost 3 times a year. So basically they just flood the habitat with green iguana babies.
Now we have to remove all the other species of iguanas that come to the island.
Absolutely.
Let's see what we got here.
Oh man, I mean, see what I mean? It's not just a possible invasion by green iguanas. They have so many threats they're already facing here on island.
Yeah, they're so small, there's no protection for them. Look at this, cats, goats, this is just ridiculous.
That's why we've got to put them through the Head Start program. We've got to give them a hand, get them over that vulnerable size. And if we don't do it, then they're going to get completely wiped off the face of the earth. They're going to go all the way extinct.
All right, let's pack this up.
You know, the iguanas have basic needs. They need good nesting habitat, and they need an environment without introduced predators. And that starts the day that they're born. The little hatchlings, they actually dig a straight chimney out of the nest chamber, and they go through the top of the nest so they can reach the open air.
Yeah, this is the juvenile that we caught. And I'm gonna put him in a cage right now. And I'm gonna give him some water, fruits, vegetables, and a little bit of protein to aid them in the process of growing. This is basically a school for the iguanas. They are very instinctive and they do not need to be taught much. While they're in here, they learn how to climb and fend for themselves. They also use their tongue to detect other iguanas in the area and other predators. Hey, Kelly.
Hey, Mikey.
What's up?
I was looking at these cages. They look really rough. What happened?
Well, as soon as we got the iguana count up to 120,
Right?
Hurricane Irma came. Well, when I came here the morning after, this cage was through that fence. Exactly through that fence. On its upside.
Were there animals in there?
Yeah, 4 iguanas in there. Just holding on, 4 of them.
You know, I have to say, when we were in Fort Worth and we were watching this storm come in on that internet and looking at the radar, I was just thinking to myself, oh my God, there's no way they're gonna make it. I honestly thought we were gonna have to start over from scratch.
Me
all
too.
new cages, all new animals.
I know what you mean, because on my way here from the home,
Right?
I saw poles on the ground, trees, animals, everything you can think of was on the road on the way here. But when I hit that corner and I saw everything together, I was so happy, so happy.
You know, and what was the hardest part from being in Fort Worth and not being able is that there was no communication. Like, we couldn't get any word out
Nobody.
whether you were
Nobody had
okay, whether
communication.
your animal's okay. When you told me the story about how the people, the residents here kind of chipped in and helped get y'all food because there wasn't any vegetation left to even feed these guys, you know, that was really heartwarming, and it made me feel like there was a real sense of community around protecting and helping the iguana survive.
It was, everybody came together and helped. All the iguanas survived, so
Right.
we won.
Iguanas versus Irma.
Yeah, we won.
Yeah, this is my tribute to the Virgin Islands. Call this home. Yeah, yeah.
The people all come together to celebrate the iguanas.
Call this home. Yeah, yeah.
It has been hard work, but now the iguanas are big enough to release. Releasing the iguanas is a really special moment. That's the last one.
That's the last one for today. And you're gonna lean low, and you're gonna get him low to the ground, and then you're just gonna gently toss him that way, because that's the way we want it.
We are really lucky to have our own special iguanas. So we have to give them somewhere safe to live where they can be protected. These are our iguanas. We are their keepers and are responsible for their future. Every single person can play a part. My family, friends, and the whole community of the British Virgin Islands. The rock iguana can be saved. Will you help?
The room I grew up in had high windows, and I had a loft bed because it was so small. I could see the highway from my window and hear it every night. Definitely nothing like where I live now. I didn't really even imagine it, honestly, because nobody talked about the West. Nobody I knew was from the West. I was like, how did nobody tell me about this? Nobody told me about this growing up. This is insane. All I wanted to do, starting college, even in high school and stuff, I was like, I want to be a pilot. 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 I want to be I want to be an ecologist. Like, I didn't even know what that was, and I wrote it down. I was like, I know that has to do with animals and their environment. After college, I was a little bit lost and didn't know what I was going to do, and my friend and I decided to go on a road trip. We started some backpacking trips, and they were amazing, and saw mountains for the first time.
Can you grab us some photos?
Yeah, but you can't make fun of me. The pack I had was my stepdad's external frame giant pack. And this one is one of my first backpacking trips. I mean, we were just like, what is this? What is this place? Like, I had no idea, and I just fell in love with it, and I couldn't leave. I just couldn't. If you're down, don't be down. I would tell people, I just want to be Jane Goodall and live in the rainforest. Learn about the world myself, not just from reading or watching movies, but like actually figuring it out. I have had to deal with feeling inferior as a woman in this field. Just like assuming that you can't hike as far, you can't carry as much weight, can't ride an ATV. The Sage Steppe ecosystem, so the ecosystem we're in right now, is one of the most heavily imperiled ecosystems due to these multiple increasing anthropogenic impacts. Habitat degradation, human activity, invasive species, climate change. All of these impacts are affecting species at lower levels of the food chain, which then also impacts golden eagles. A golden eagle up close is so incredible. They're about 2.5 feet, all dark bird with this amazing golden nape. They have these huge yellow eyes that are marbled with like black and brown swirls. What we're trying to figure out is how these impacts are working together. So how is eagle reproduction and productivity affected by the changes that are made in this ecosystem by human impacts?
Baby's right there. We're gonna set up rappel. Feel free to set up what you want. Be really, really careful. I wouldn't stand right here because these are loose rocks. And that could kill the baby. But the baby's right there. There's a baby bunny right there too.
They're so calm and just like calming to you. You're just like in awe of their presence, but also like know that as long as top predators exist, something's going right in the ecosystem.
Yep! That's still too much. It's a lot. He didn't like that. Rock! Okay, I'm in here. No, that's actually good. Hi, buddy.
Barn owl, a mallard.
I'm gonna look in his mouth. Oh man, he does have a trick.
My dad called me today when I was in the nest. I don't know if you guys heard that, but I was just like, I have to answer this real quick just to tell him, like, hey, I can't talk, I'm in the eagle nest, because I hadn't talked to him in a little while. And I was like, hey, I'm an eagle nest. He was like, oh, okay. Like, I don't think he really knows how crazy, like if he was watching, he'd be like, oh my God, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. But because he's like, oh, this is normal, my daughter does weird things in places I've never seen and I don't know about, so it's just like out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. He's like, oh yeah, she's in the eagle nest, whatever. But if he actually saw it, it would be like, what? I do feel like I'm living my dream, for sure. If I had to give one piece of advice to my 12-year-old self, this world exists and you can do it and you can start now. The women that came before us had to overcome a lot more, and they kind of paved the way for us.
We spend $8 billion a year running over wildlife. When did this become okay? If you took a fraction of that $8 billion, you take a quarter of it, and you invest it in crossing structures, this problem would be solved in a generation. The number one issue facing wildlife today is loss of habitat and habitat fragmentation. One of the reasons that animals move is because they're not able to get exactly what they need where they are. And so when you have these migrations that have survived over millennia, it's because the animals are following that fresh green grass as it's greening up. This pattern of movement is actually what enables them to survive in what are otherwise these incredibly harsh conditions.
The importance of intact habitat for wildlife populations can't be overstated. When we're talking about intact habitat, we're talking about habitats that haven't been unnaturally disturbed due to invasive species, invasive vegetation, impacts from structures that people place on them, housing developments, roads. Anything that makes noise and really disturbs the habitat is going to have a negative impact on wildlife populations. So the more open space, the more open, intact habitat we can have, the better off our wildlife populations, the healthier their populations are going to be in the long run.
An estimated 1 to 2 million large animals are hit every year by motorists on our highway. They result in about 200 human deaths and close to 30,000 injuries. And this is at an annual cost to Americans of over $8 billion.
The safety aspect is huge because I wouldn't want any of my family or friends or anybody else to, have to be put in a situation where, these animals are trying to cross and you end up hitting them. It's just, we need to do better.
what does it look like to fix this problem? What does it look like to build a bridge for animals? With the goal that ultimately animals will have essentially their own pathways, their own highway, if you will, for them to get from point A to B where they need to go. In our eyes, Nevada has absolutely been a leader in this area. They have put in crossings for mule deer over US 93. Those crossings have been in for a while now. I know that they've had something like 37,000 successful uses of these crossings, and that basically means that there are 37,000 times that there wasn't a potential to have a driver possibly hitting an animal on that roadway.
We built our very first overpass in Nevada back in 2010, and we were one of the first in North America. Since then, we've added additional 5 for a total of 6 across the state, 5 of which address the mule deer herd that pass through the Pequot Summit Mountain Range.
This particular deer herd, known as the Area 7 mule deer herd in northeast Nevada, makes a migration from the Jarbidge Mountains down into the Pequot Mountains during this migration. And the reason why mule deer need to do this is the snow loads that happen in the Jarbidge Mountains would be too severe and intense for the deer to be able to find forage and make it through the winter. So they are forced to make these long treks down to an area that doesn't receive as much snow so that they can make it through the winter and rear their fawns and have them survive so that they can continue on. There's about 60% of this herd that makes this migration, and we believe that it could be as many as 5,500 deer or so crossing on Highway 93, and then of those, maybe about 4,500 or so that are crossing across the Pequots into the southern part of the Pequots to spend the rest of their winter. Nevada Department of Wildlife has been monitoring deer in northeastern Nevada for many years, and when we came to the table trying to figure out where these crossings should be, we came with a lot of data about the migration and historical movements of these mule deer and where the best place would be for these crossings to be most successful.
We actually looked at a variety of data, including movement data that was provided by the Department of Wildlife, as well as our crash records and our carcass records. And we see where all that data overlaps to see where we're having the highest impact for potential mitigation.
Well, I think as we were inadvertently one of the front runners diving into the construction of overcrossings, there wasn't a lot of research available when we first started. And we were really reaching out to anyone we could just to help us develop, guidance on that. And, how big were these supposed to be? How long? What works?
We ended up seeing what the Canadians did up in Banff with their crossing. I contacted them. They were good enough to send us some basic plans and actually talk about it a little bit. And even at that time, it was new for the Canadians. But they were getting positive feedback and data.
The largest overpass is 200 feet long along the roadway and approximately 600 feet long traversing across the highway. Consistent with the other 2 crossings on I-80 that are all 200 feet long, the 3 structures are some of the largest in the United States. The wildlife crossings are fairly simple structures. There's not a lot of complicated elements. We start with the main foundations that will support the entire structure. We follow that with precast arch elements or steel structural elements. Then next we construct the mechanically stabilized earth walls that will support the backfill or soil that then goes over the structure. And generally as the final finishing touches, we put on the fencing and any vegetation that's required. By using precast elements, we can really minimize the impacts to traffic, as opposed to our typical cast-in-place construction that can take months. With the use of precast elements, we can limit that time frame down to just several days, and so it makes a tremendous impact on our schedules, thereby minimizing the impacts to traffic, but also getting these structures constructed in a timely fashion just so they can be beneficial for the migrations and again, any impacts we can make to minimize those vehicular animal collisions is important, and the faster we can get these built, the better. The East Pequop is probably one of my favorite overpasses that we've constructed just because of the topography and the way we were able to make it blend in. We did have some additional unique features to this one we haven't incorporated in the past, including berms on the structure just to help reduce some of the sound impacts from traffic and reduce some of the visual impacts for the wildlife as they cross.
Some of the innovative things that we were able to accomplish on this project is dealing with some of the fence issues and funneling the animals to the structures. We try to use a 45-degree angle to allow as much of an openness ratio at the entrance of those structures and really funnel those animals to the most successful crossing points. We also utilized fencing at the end of our fencing project where we would pinch the fencing into the roadway, and we think that's really helped in reducing the number of collisions within the project limits.
We are still monitoring deer. We have put GPS tracking devices on over 150 deer since 2008. And so we were able to watch what the deer were doing before the crossings went in and then how they've been using the area since. And it has been a huge success. When the crossings first go in, the deer can get a little bit confused and a little unsure about the fencing. But once they've figured it out, we can watch where deer are almost on a string. They just go right to where the crossing is and use it without any trouble at all.
I do think these structures should be part of an infrastructure growth plan in the future, and we as a department have already, I think, headed that direction. The initial crossings were obviously constructed out on existing roadways, but since that time that we started constructing some of these over 10 years ago, we have included them in roadway expansion projects, and it has become more of a component to our larger construction jobs to consider this up front, part of these wildlife and vehicular interactions, and how do we address that, and I think it has become more important to the department.
When you put these in the right places, you are saving people's lives, you're saving wildlife lives, you're reconnecting these places that we call home that have been severed by roads. And again, properly placed at your highest priority areas, you're saving taxpayer money, because if you have a stretch that has about 5 or more deer vehicle collisions per mile per year, it actually costs society more to do nothing, just to let those animals die and let those people get injured, than it costs to put in a structure that's going to last 75 years, and poof, you've solved the problem overnight. You're saving people's lives, you're saving wildlife lives, you're reconnecting habitats, you're saving taxpayer money. Done. Solved.
The Elwha is where I grew up. It's my home. It's where I have my roots. It's also where my family has their roots. Growing up along the Elwha River, I could only see the beauty of everything that it was. But after learning more about the river, learning more about the environment, I see how much the ecosystem has been manipulated by people. I love the entire Elwha ecosystem because it's where all my favorite wildlife are. The black bears, the bald eagles, the mountain lions. I can also see how much it's been changed. People who worked here say that they saw fish, salmon, swim all the way up to the dam and just circle around because they couldn't get any farther. The dam was such a significant part of my grandpa's life. He worked for the company for his entire career. As a tribal member, my grandma was definitely an advocate for dam removal. She wanted to see them come out, and she wanted to see the salmon populations return to the way that they were historically, the way that she'd seen them in her lifetime. My grandma told me this story about how when she was a young girl, she would walk back to a small side channel of the Elwha that ran through their property. The creek that ran through their property would just be bubbling over with Chinook salmon. The fish were at least 100 pounds. I don't think my grandpa ever imagined the dams being removed at all. I never knew that I would be getting into restoring the river after the dams had been removed. When the reservoirs were dewatered, the entire lake bed was basically a moonscape. They were just rocks. There was no vegetation. There were huge stumps.
Elwha restoration has been a really unique situation for scientists to be able to study. This is the largest dam removal project ever. In the Elwha, we're watching an entire ecosystem, an entire watershed being restored. I just feel so fortunate to be here and to have seen the lead up to dam removal, to watch dam removal take place, and now see this amazing regeneration. I also feel lucky that I work for the tribe because they care so much about this. So I've been looking since I came to the tribe for promising young tribal members who are really interested in wildlife.
Another cottonwood is 415. 415? Yes, and it's uni. Okay. So we're looking at how bird species, beavers, ungulates, specifically deer and elk, are returning to the lake beds and how they're using that habitat and also their impacts on the habitat.
My perspective is to look at interactions between species and their environment. When salmon grow out in the marine environment, they put on all this mass and they become big. And when they swim back up their natal stream, they bring with them this mass of nutrients. When these animals come back into a river, they are consumed by a whole variety of wildlife species. Things like black bears and otters and mink and weasels. When a bear eats a salmon and then moves into the forest, it's bringing with them those nutrients that it has attained from the salmon carcasses to provide life to these trees.
I just love spending time out on the lake bed, seeing new plants growing on their own. Lake Aldwell has a cultural significance to the Klallam tribe because on that lake bed is a creation site, an area where the Klallam people believe that the Creator made them from stone, and that's where the whole tribe began. When I came here as a little kid and I stood on that bridge, I had no idea that something so culturally important, so significant and sacred to the tribe was buried under the lake. We have this common goal. We want to restore the river. And thinking like a scientist, I consider what information do we need that will help us get there?
The big picture that I want people to take away is the interconnectedness, that it's not just about salmon, it's not just about plants, it's about the interconnectivity of all of it. It's about the salmon coming from the ocean and feeding that forest.
Something I've really learned from Kim is to be inquisitive and open-minded and really think outside the box. River restoration has so many different elements to consider. It's such a vast project. Over the past 3 years, I've gotten to see some major changes. I just love that I can be a part of such a significant restoration in a place that's so important to me.
It is November. Welcome to the east of the Netherlands. This is the domain of man. The nest seems abandoned. But appearances are deceptive. A male and a female human being at the beginning of the afternoon. But what is going on? The male is clearly enjoying his afternoon rest, but the female seems to have other plans. She's preparing herself to set off and is looking for something that will be useful later on. After she has asked attention from the male, he gives her commands. The female registers everything. This will enable her to fulfill his wishes later on in the heat of the battle, sometimes miles away from the home front. There she goes, ready for the hunt. But the outcome is by no means certain. There is our female. She's had more than a mile of ground to cover to get here. She's almost at the spot where she wants to be. But in a place where so many humans gather, there is always danger. It went all right, this time. Now the female can cross over safely to the place she was looking for. An impressive example of mankind's capacity to cooperate. The food storage. Once this place was a forest that ran unbroken from the east to the west of the Netherlands. But brick by brick and pole by pole, people have managed to build a cover for storing and collecting their food. Sometimes they make them even 25 meters high. People converge underneath them to find their food. Here they have created an area of 600 square meters to spread and select their food. More humans have arrived at the food storage. They've come here to fatten up for the winter. This female has children, and they don't leave her side. The family is looking for a specific kind of potato which the young ones really love. Over there, the boy yells. But what they're looking for isn't there. Nothing but dust. The family will have to search for something else to keep themselves alive. The adult might just survive on this, but it will not support a child for long. This is a brutal world. Living in the food storage is about making the most of the hand the landscape deals you. But it's always a gamble here because everything may change tomorrow. For our female, the situation is slightly different. It's payday. Over 100 chickens, pigs and cows there for the taking. When the temperature cools down, the female knows that she's nearby. The light reveals where the prey is situated. That's the place to be. These gatherings of pigs, chickens, fish, cows, goats and sheep take place all over the world. It is estimated that in the Netherlands alone, 1.5 million animals gather every single day in this way. These huge numbers create one of the greatest wildlife spectacles on Earth and one of the most miraculous events on the entire planet. But where prey gathers, predators are never far behind. Here she sets her ambush. A big pig catches her attention. Food, if only she could catch it. She must assess the right species and the exact weight. But she won't have this nice hunting spot to herself for long. Soon, other humans arrive. Another huntress has a more proactive technique and has spotted an opportunity. Hop! And that works. These animals must live their lives with all their senses at a high pitch. The faintest smell, the slightest sound, the briefest glimpse could give warning of an attack. Now they have sensed that there is something wrong. They investigate, but what can they do? The female knows that she has to act quickly now. She has picked her victim. The prey is quiet as a mouse. The human is nearly close enough to launch her attack. There she goes. Got it. The incredible agility of the human, practiced since he was a kid, was just enough to swing the balance. Now the prey is captured, the human returns home. Extraordinary strategies like these lie at the heart of the struggle between predator and prey. They're born of a conflict that is relentless and unforgiving. A conflict that eternally binds the hunter and the hunted.
Life in the ocean can be tough for an animal. It's an inhospitable environment where the name of the game is eat or be eaten. Sometimes life in the ocean depends on simply not being seen. Many marine creatures have the extraordinary ability to blend in. Meet the masters of camouflage. How does a fish conceal itself when swimming out in open water? Pacific herring show off two strategies. The first is counter shading. Herring are darker on their backs than their bellies. Counter shading counteracts light from above, while preventing a shadow that would stand out to predators. Their second strategy is to have mirror-like scales. By reflecting light, the scales render the fish almost invisible to a predator looking from the side. There are many species of crab that have exceptional camouflage skills. Kelp crabs are typically found hiding within bull kelp beds, and they are shaped and colored just like them. So much so that when they climb up bull kelp, they practically disappear. Heart crabs are strange-looking critters. They're shaped like they're wearing a shaggy Muppet costume. This serves them well to break up their outline, and it's often only when they move are they easily seen. They're named for the distinctive heart-shaped outline of raised bumps on its triangular carapace. Decorated crabs take camouflage dress up to another level. These crabs use bristles on their back, like Velcro. They pluck bits of life from all around them and attach it to themselves using these bristles. The best part is, if they happen to move to a new location, easy, they just change their outfit. Despite the vibrant colors on its body, the red Irish lord seems to disappear. These fish can change color and texture. The disruptive coloration breaks up the fish's outline against the encrusted rocks it calls home. By standing out from the rest of its body, an animal's eyes can betray its hiding spot. But the eyes of this striking species of sculpin are ablaze with dazzling dots that seem to maintain its disruptive coloration. All of this camouflage helps the red Irish lord lie in wait and ambush unsuspecting prey that ventures a bit too close. Some fish, such as flounder and sole, are experts at camouflage. They begin their lives as normal swimming fish, and over the course of a few weeks, they go through a major metamorphosis. They get a flattened body, and both eyes move to one side of their head. And after this transformation, they are totally adapted to living on the seafloor. Here, they live out their life, hiding from predators and waiting for a meal to drift by. The amazing camouflage patterns on these fish perfectly resemble the seafloor. These crafty flatfish have another couple of tricks up their sleeve. They wriggle around and cover themselves with sand to help cover up their form. There are even some species of flatfish that have evolved to change the colors and patterns on their skin. With this dynamic skin patterning technique, they can move between different habitats and always stay undercover. Octopuses are like chameleons of the sea, but a chameleon's game is weak compared to the mighty octo. Octopus have special cells under their skin called chromatophores that allows them to change their color almost instantly. Chameleons, on the other hand, take several minutes to gradually change color. So maybe we ought to call chameleons jungle octopus. These clever critters can also modify their skin texture to mimic sand, rock, coral, and many other landscape features. They're able to do this by altering the papillae in their skin. With all of the different methods that animals use to match their environment, it's no wonder that camouflage is such a widely used and effective survival strategy. When it comes to the art of blending in, these masters of camouflage are really just a drop in the ocean.
It's going to be 100 degrees, so I think they're going to need water. Let's see what you get in here.
This will be out of the sun.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty well dust up there around the water, huh?
Yeah. A few years ago, I was out here in northeastern Nevada to work on a wild horse project. And I remember waking up and seeing hundreds of wild horses coming in from every direction. Just battling it out for a drink. That was such a transformative experience. And I think in that moment, I developed that curiosity that I think really pushed me as a scientist.
There's like at least another 50 that are just walking out of the mountains.
We're back here to really try to understand this whole wild horse situation, and specifically the effects these wild horses are having on wildlife, our public lands, and these ecosystems that we all rely on.
It seems like these horses are coming in from every direction. I mean, do you think this is the only water source?
Yeah, there's probably no other water probably for 5 miles around here.
So what would happen if this spring dried up?
A lot of them would succumb to not having the resources to survive. You know, Nevada has more wild horses than any other state, and yet it's the driest state in the union. So everything is focused around water.
You know, the antelope, I don't know if they're... I want to let them come in and get a drink too.
The competition exists between user groups, horses, livestock, wildlife. Anytime you're reducing the amount of food on somebody's plate, then things are going to get bad at some point in time.
Nobody wants them to suffer.
Nobody wants them to suffer, They're trying to just live.
Yeah.
And it's us. It's we as humans that aren't acting appropriately and managing the rangeland resources appropriately.
I mean, this should have vegetation.
Oh, it should have, yeah. The abuse and lack of vegetation is just due to trampling. And so we've lost most of those environments just to overuse and had to transition into more of an exotic weed type environment. I mean, you can't give up, right? And we've just got to keep charging and speak for those species that don't really have a voice.
We're setting out to meet up with some wildlife experts who have dedicated their entire careers to studying these ecosystems. We want to understand how wild horses are impacting not only the sagebrush community, but also species like the threatened Lowhunton cutthroat trout and sage grouse, a bird that could become endangered if its habitat continues to decline. What would you say the key driver that transformed this place from a vibrant ecosystem into what we see today?
Well, the fact there's no vegetation is a result of grazing, yeah. We're looking at bare dirt here. We'll see a bit later what this should look like if it was a healthy meadow. Grouse and other species need to have green vegetation mostly for the young. If they don't have a place like this where they can get access to green vegetation, you don't have sage grouse.
Wow.
We're coming down the road, not even expecting to see, sage grouse, and there's maybe 30 sage grouse. They are so perfectly adapted to this ecosystem. So those are my first ever sage grouse I've ever seen in my life. Yeah, pretty stoked. I've done research I think that's the really fun part about getting the chance to go chase sage grouse with you guys and see this ecosystem, because so much of the narrative is a horse narrative. And it's like, wait a second, there's a lot more out there than horses.
Yeah, I'm excited for you guys to wake up in the morning and look around and see where you are since we came in at night and contrast it with where we were earlier today.
Yeah.
A big meadow with
Really
lots
cool.
of grouse.
Lots of grouse.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see this meadow. Horses are completely excluded, and cattle are managed and only allowed to graze at the end of the summer.
There's a doe mule deer walking near the tractor, and she's got 2 little spotted fawns.
There's 2 other birds flying. They're gonna land in the sagebrush behind us.
Oh, yeah. There's 2. There's one right behind her, about 10 feet walking. So cool. You just see their little head, they're just like on a swivel.
Water is the limiting resource for not just sage grouse, but all of these animals out here. These meadows become critical.
But you can't have a high density of pressure that's unchecked. And the fences here show that.
That's correct.
These meadows are kind of like the beating heart of the sagebrush ecosystem. It was clear that a healthy meadow supports a healthy sagebrush community.
So Rambler's kind of new to our family here. We haven't really gotten to know him yet. He's a gelding from Nevada.
So, was it horses or public lands first? What was your first love?
The health and well-being of the public lands is my first love and the most important thing. And that's what's really at the heart of the issue in wild horse and burro management. It's about the health of the lands and taking care of them for diversity and wildlife and for future generations to enjoy our public lands.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get him out of the hills here.
There hasn't been one day in the Bureau's oversight of this program that it hasn't been caught in between polarized public opinion and extreme controversy in how BLM should be managing horses and burros. BLM's adoption demand is way down, adopting about 4,000 a year. Congress is either going to have to decide that we either care for unadopted animals the rest of their lives, or they're going to have to decide on some other disposition for those animals. And those choices are very, very controversial. The western rangelands don't have an unlimited capacity to support wild horses.
Apparently we're gonna go see some trout. I'm not quite sure where we're gonna find trout, but we're with a trout biologist, so he's gotta know where we're going. There is a little creek down there. We're gonna go meet up with Cody and Jane, and they have a few streams in mind where they have these endemic native trout, Lahontan cutthroat trout. How rare is this system? How many that you know of in northern Nevada, which is your expertise?
Systems like this that don't have intense grazing impacts are relatively rare across northwestern Nevada. The Black Rocks is one of my favorite ranges for that reason.
If there's any metric that will tell us about the impacts of wild horses or the state of these landscapes, it should be these riparian corridors where we're told Lahontan cutthroat trout still lives.
I think we should be good. Try to find a fish now.
No pressure. We go side by side right here?
Yep, exactly. There he is. Got him.
Got him.
Nice job, Charles.
Yep. So cool.
Pretty awesome.
That's a life highlight right there. Seriously.
It was about a 4-inch fish.
Dude, thank you so much.
Good job.
That's awesome.
That was a beautiful fish. There he is. Got him.
Oh!
Nice job. That's an adult Lahontan cutthroat trout.
That's such a beautiful fish. And you're saying, like, when it's overgrazed, you lose that complexity, you lose that habitat.
Exactly. It's why a lot of these small mountain streams can be so sensitive and so easily impacted, grazing impacts from horses and livestock.
Yeah, I think the drive in here was one of the driest, most arid landscapes I've ever driven through. And then you get here and you're like, what? There's like a full-on aspen grove creek with trout in it. Stoked we did, because it's not 100 degrees in a sandbox. So after we saw the pristine creek, we went to a place where livestock are managed by density and time of year they can graze. But the horses graze year-round, and in this area, there's hundreds over the target population size. As we were coming up this mountain, I mean, we're way back here, and you could see these trails from miles away. It's obvious that years and years of hundreds and hundreds of horses made them. And it was like we kicked a beehive. You know, there's just horses just literally pouring out of this drainage.
We could see they were all confined right down on that spring source that's right below us here, and we're just seeing them trail up out of the bottom here, and that constant pressure is what begins to break down the spring complexes that feed these drainages. And we can see the impacts of grazing as we begin to look at the severe bank alteration and hoof trampling in here, which continues to spread the water flow out wider and wider.
Like, a fish could not live in that.
Right.
To think that this place, is at the mercy of policy, is at the mercy of a social conflict with how to manage wild horses. The fact that these fish are caught in that crosshair, it's a pretty gnarly reality that could all go away.
The program is in its worst shape ever in its whole history. Drastic measures need to be taken as we move forward. The worst case scenario is that the herds continue to increase, the health of the public lands continues to decline in condition, and that the horses on the range and wildlife would begin to die of starvation and thirst as the resources are unavailable to sustain them.
If we did manage horses appropriately to appropriate levels, all resources would benefit. Horses would benefit, wildlife would benefit, and the land, the overall rangeland resources would improve.
Anything more than just a wild animal that's just trying its best, you know. It's cool to see them, I'll admit it, you know. Even after everything we've experienced, like, you can't, that's cool, that's powerful, there's something there. If the status quo continues, you know, and this ecosystem continues to fade, I think I'll feel, really let down by humanity. In the model that's unfolding today, nobody's winning. And that's, I think, the main thing I've learned.
Who would have thought that they would be here? In all the United States, why did they pick Meeteetse?
She had heard a ruckus in the yard the night before, and she knew that the dog had been fighting something. And so when they got up the next morning, she told my dad to go out and see what had gone on.
You need to get outside and check Shep for porcupine quills. And so my dad looked, and there was no porcupine quills, but there was a dead animal. And neither one of them, really recognized this animal. But Lucille, being Lucille, said, well, we should take that to town and have it stuffed. It would look great on the mantle. And so we went about our business and went to town and laid it out on the counter of LaFrenchie's taxidermy. And he said, well, I'm pretty sure you have an endangered species on your hands. They asked, well, what is it? And he said, a black-footed ferret. And neither of my parents knew what that was.
My mom was always upset from the fact that she never did get to get her ferret mounted.
Black-footed ferrets require prairie dogs. They're an obligate predator on prairie dogs. So without prairie dogs, we're not going to have black-footed ferrets. Prairie dogs declined once we started settling the West because we plowed up part of the country and turned it into the breadbasket of America. And then later on, we started poisoning prairie dogs to reduce competition between domestic livestock and prairie dogs. And then finally, the plague came along, which is an old world disease that came into North America around 1900, and both prairie dogs and ferrets are susceptible to plague. There were reports through the 40s and 50s and 60s that, we're seeing fewer and fewer ferrets. And then the question that people were scratching their heads, do we have any more black-footed ferrets out there?
Our job was to go out and look for black-footed ferrets on these coal lease sites prior to the site being developed for coal. Under the Endangered Species Act, we needed to go out and, at least make an effort to see if they were still there before that habitat was completely removed. And it was during that time when the first ferret was discovered in Meeteetse on the hog ranch. And it was very exciting, very exciting. The survey technique was you would hold your hands outside of the window with a spotlight in your hand, and you would just scan along the ground looking for green eye shine. Black-footed ferrets have very characteristic emerald green eye shine. And we were spotlighting our way in. But in this case, I saw the eye shine, but it was almost light enough to where I could see and make out the outline of the animal. And it just ran across the road and went down a burrow. And Steve and I kind of started dancing and jumping around because here we had actually seen a ferret. So we set a trap, and I grabbed a lawn chair, and I sat there all day waiting for the ferret. And at dusk, just as it got dark, we had him caught. That was October 29th, 1981. To our knowledge, we had the only live black-footed ferret in the world in our hands.
Well, it's pretty unnerving when somebody tells you that you're going to be responsible for that species in the state where you work. You really have a lot of mixed emotions, a lot of anxiety that, wow, what if you make the mistake that causes the extinction?
We found some right away in '81, and that was a handful. And by '82, we got into more detailed searches and a lot more intensive work.
We were fairly confident, even after that first summer, that we had pretty much pegged where the population was and about what the size was. So we expanded sort of the list of questions. Are they producing enough ferrets out of here that we could take some and form the core of a reintroduction program elsewhere?
That discussion came up, and it was not looked with favor for a while among either Fish and Wildlife Service or Wyoming Game and Fish.
These tiny, small populations are at risk from all kinds of random stuff. It could be anything. Just leaving a population alone is not the management answer.
Everyone finally came around to thinking, well, we probably do need to do something because we can't recover an animal by just protecting it here. That led ultimately to the discussion in 1984 that where we would actually start a small-scale effort and then ease our way into it. We had, of course, reached our peak numbers in 1984, 129 or so animals, quite a few litters and adults out there and lots of kits, and we were expecting good things in the following year, 1985.
I went out in June, was walking around and found a dead prairie dog on the surface of the ground. That was pretty unusual. And the word came back within a week that it was had died of plague.
We were by that time losing ferrets, and we knew it. We counted them, I think, in September. We were down to 30 from 60, so we were losing about half of them every month.
That was a turning point for the whole, whatever would come forward. There really isn't any other choice but to take them into captivity.
By winter, we could only find 4. We went from 15 down to 4 known animals out there, and thought, man, this is really looking dire.
All of us thought, wow, those are maybe the last black-footed ferrets that will ever exist, that we'll ever see. I think it was really that poignant.
The very last ferret out there was the adult male Scarface. He was incredibly difficult to catch. It took us probably half a year or more to finally get him. He was free-ranging. All of his skills were intact and his behaviors were normal. Immediately when we got him into Sebile, he bred a female right away, and that was one of the 2 litters they had in '87. And that was our first look at kits in captivity and surviving kits, and that was a big plus, to say the least. In 1991, there were enough ferrets being produced in captivity to start considering reintroductions. It was really a sense of euphoria, I think, to actually get animals back out on the ground. I don't know how else to describe it. It was just really a great feeling.
We've continued to put ferrets out. We've had to find a way to get past the political and social objections to having a few prairie dogs on the landscape. We've had to find a way to get past the regulatory concerns related to having an endangered species on your property. And we've found a way to do that at over 25 sites in 8 states, Mexico and Canada. But we still keep getting our legs cut out from under us by the fact that plague will come in and hit these areas. They're not going to be benignly managed, put out, and left there. We're going to have to deal with this exotic disease. Folks who have been involved with ferret recovery have dreamed about bringing ferrets back to Meeteetse because that's where all the ferrets we're working with came from. So they're going back out today, and we're hoping that we can have a few dozen ferrets on the landscape that have young and replace themselves and maybe even grow. And we'll be able to add that into our tally for recovery for the species across the range.
Oh, she's so pretty.
Oh, it's a little sassy pants, isn't it?
The real recovery for the black-footed ferret has to take place in the wild. It's a wild animal, so we have to go back out on this landscape that stretches from Canada to Mexico. We need to have ferrets out there eating prairie dogs and living and dying and never even seeing people, but being there.
Over the years, we've lost a lot of species that were all part of our ecosystems. And why not help the ferret? We don't know what intricate part it really is in our ecosystem until we lose them.